Hello everyone. We will continue with the fifth model, designing with distributed object. So we had discussed in the previous videos basically client server system and how client server system will be working on each other. The basic architecture of the client server communication, and basically what are the difficulties found in when accessing one object in the one Java virtual machine to the another Java virtual machine, as the address spaces including methods and other variables. So how we can handle the difficulties by using what kind of supporting software, or what are the supportive protocol. And we had discussed about JRM, Java Remote Method Invocation importance, and how we have taken to handle this kind of Java virtual machine to one to the another one and accessing the object data structure. And we are applying that JRM method invocation by using the proxy design pattern. And we had a technically that how we have done that technically is marshalling and demarshalling, and how setting up a remote objective we had discussed in the previous videos. So let us continue with next we will continue the remote interfaces. So now coming to this part, we would discuss about remote interfaces. Actually here the first step is in implementing a remote object. So we know that how we have to define that functionality that will export it to the client, which implies the creation of Java interfaces. So this is the one thing. And in the case of RMI, remote method, so in the RMI, so remote method invocation, the remote interface Java, which extends the interface Java RMI dot remote, which contains no method and hence simply serve as a marker. So here the clients are restricted to accessing the methods which are defined in the remote interface. We call such method called as remote method invocation, that is RMI. So these remote method invocations always can fail due to another number of reasons. One might be here the remote object may have crashed, the server may have failed, or the communication link between the client and the server may not be operational. So there are a lot of reasons, etc., etc. So Java RMI encapsulates such a failure in the form of an object type. So we say that java.rmi remote exception. As a result, all remote method must be declared to throw this exception handling. In case of summary, a remote interface must extend Java RMI remote, and every method in it must declare through Java RMI remote exception. This concept as shown in the we can give it a one of the examples in the next slide. So this is the in summary we can take it as. So the in summary, the remote interface must extend Java RMI. Every method in it is must declare to throw the Java RMI remote exception. This concept we have shown in the respective example. So import Java RMI public interface, so that we have taken here book interface extends remote public string get authority function will be taken into this, throws remote exceptions, public string get title throws remote exceptions, public string get throws remote exceptions, remote object which implements that we could take, we know that here remote object implements the remote interfaces. They may implement more methods, but client which are restricted to accessing the methods declared in the remote interfaces. So this is the part we say that how about remote interface. Next, how we can take it as the remote method invocation and with example remote exception can be handled. So implementing a remote interface, we'll see in the next slide how we are going to implement a remote interfaces through the. So now we would discuss about remote implementing remote interfaces. So why and how we are going to implement these remote interfaces, that is our task into be consideration. So after remote interface which we have defined or declared, that is Java RMI remote, that is the Java remote method invocation, that is the remote method invocation RMI. So here Java RMI we had taken that encapsulates such a failure in the form of all java.rmi.remote exception. So that we have declared through the this example. So that is the remote interface. Once we are defined, the next step is to implement them via remote classes. So that's why we are going to implement our remote interfaces. So how we can be done this, parameters are actually two, and return the values from remote methods may be a primitive type of remote type, or you can call it as a of a local type. So all argument to a remote object and all return values from remote object must be is the case of serializable, that we need to consider. So here what we do is, thus in addition to the requirement that remote classes implement remote interfaces. So we say that here what we require, that they also implement the remote classes, what we say that interface, serializable interface, that is called as remote, that is java dot io input output dot serializable interface, that we need to consider. The next thing is, whenever the parameters of non-remote types are passed by copy, they are serialized using the object serialization mechanism. So they too must implement the serializable interfaces. So here a remote object must somehow be capable of being transmitted over network. So that point we should consider here, why this remote method is remote object. After implementing the remote interface, once we define that one remote RMI, then we need to implement as a parameter all the type of the what type of the is based upon serializable. Next we should object must be somehow the capable of being transmitted, which should be transmitted over a particular network. Actually a convenient way to accomplish this is to extend the class Java RMI server unicast remote object. So that we need to be consider. So that we need to be considered in the next code here. Okay, thus we say that implementation of book interface is as below. How we are going to book interface? So this is the library class library example we had taken about how and why we are going to this one. So import Java input output, import Java RMI, so that we need to declare remote method invocation, and import Java RMI server public class book extends a unicast remote object which implements book interface realizable private string title author and private string id. So public book, the string should be, we have taken it as the title 1. Similarly string author, that's the author 1, string id 1 throws respective remote exception. Title is equal to title 1 and author is equal to author 1, id equal to id 1. So now public string get author throws the remote exception, return the author. So here public string get title through the remote exception return title. So that should be taken as public static. What is that one? Author id is equal to id 1. So here that could be continued in the next slide. Public string get author through the remote exception return the author should be taken. So similarly the public string get title throws the remote exception for the title return title, which will return title. Similarly public string get throws the exception of return id. So that we should take it as a why, because book interface we are going to implement. One is get author, get title, get book id. So all we have taken, and all should be, we have parameter, the book parameter, that is the type is throws exception. Why we have to unicast remote object which implements book interface including serialization. All the title author id we have declared as a private here. Since it is a remote class, the boost must here book class, we say that class book, the class book must be compiled using the because we have taken Java initial slide java.rmi, so the registry. So this should be compiled with the Java RMI method compiler, using the RMI compiler by invoking the command RMIC, which has given RMIC book. So that we should consider here RMIC book not return. The compiler here, that is the RMIC compiler. C means compile. So compiler here which produce a file name, that is the book stub dot classes, that we are not taken here. So that is the case how it is going to execute, which always act as a proxy for calls to the method of book interfaces. So when the constructor for remote class, the book in the above case, which are is invoke the constructor for unicast remote object, the export the remote object. So when an exported remote object is passed as a parameter or written from a remote method call, actually the stub for that remote object is passed instead of the object itself. The stub itself contains a reference, we say that a particular reference to the serialized object and implement all of the remote interfaces that the remote object which will implement. So here stub class which will have all the acting as a proxy details. That is the main thing in how this implementation of book interfaces. All the proxy class. So all the calls to the remote interfaces which are go through that stub to the remote object, which remote object are thus passed by reference. This we can going to show in the next slide, which diagrammatically we are going to tell it. So this is the diagrammatical representation of passing of remote object as references. Remote objects are thus passed by reference. This we could see in this diagram. So where we have a single remote object that is being accessed from two clients. Actually, both clients maintain a reference to a stub object that point to the remote object that has a field named A. So this is the remote object. We have a stub of code here. Integer A void set A of int x, A equal to x, get A, integer of get A, return A. So this is the remote site, this is the remote object, stub of object. So client machine 1 and client machine 2. Both client machine will have access of this remote object code. Proxy stub 1, client 1 and client 2. Suppose that the client 1 here invokes the method set A. So here the method set A with a parameter 5. We say that the parameter 5. As we have seen earlier, the call goes through the stub into the remote object and get executed, changing the field A to 5. So here we have taken the parameter equal to 5. What we can do this similarly, actually the scheme has the particular consequences that any changes made to the state of the object by remote method invocation, that is RMI, which are reflected in the original remote object. So if the second client now invokes the method get A, capital here get A, the updated value 5 is returned to it. So this is the how that object, that is the we have the set A for int x age equal to x. Assume that a is 5 or x value equal to 5. How this 5 is going to access that one client machine, that is call goes through the stub to the remote object and get executed, changing the respective field. So which are the values will be 5. Here the actually the scheme we need to talk about why and how updated 5 is written to it. So this is the, in contrast, the parameter or return values which are not remote object, which are passed by value. So thus any changes to the object state by this client which are reflected only in the client's copy, not in the server instance. Or similarly, we say that if the server update its instance, the changes are not reflected in the client's copies. So that we are going to tell how that object, or we say that a client copy, how it can be reflected in the particular. That's why this is the passing of a reference object, one object or any object which has a references throughout that different client machine, that is remote site. We can say the remote site, that is the remote object will be taken into that, and how these client machines which are going to that executed. So next we are going to discuss with the creating the server. So this is the come to that one. So before a remote object which can be accessed, and it must be instantiated, we say that instantiated. So that could be that one of the we say that a stored object registry. So this is the how actually we are going to create the server with the help of these things. These things means Java RMI. So usually that technique we should take it as a registry technique, that is in the Java, which would help us to take a registry, that is the naming technology. So how it must be instantiated and stored in an object registry so that client obtain its references. Such a registry which is provided in the form of a class Java RMI dot naming. So that we could take. So why? Because creating server, the naming is required for in the network before registering, and after that we should bind it to the network. So this method bind, so we are using the system call or the method. So the bind which is used to register an object and has the following signature. Why? Because that we should take it why signature is required. That is the case of public static void bind. Okay, string name in URL remote object throws already bound exception, comma malformed URL exception, comma remote exception. So why we are taking this all three together here? Because because we have to create the client, that is the creating server here, sorry, server, that we should take it as a implementing how that remote object. So this is the why bind will be taken, because bind system call will be connecting to the network. So we know that host byte order to the network byte order, which and all we can do it in the respective bind technology. So that is why we have taking a public that is static void bind technology with a string named URL will be taken, and one is the URL which we should take that respective unique port number, right? And another one is the remote object which throws already the bound. All three exception will be possible here. Maybe the already the bound exception required in case of any errors, and malformed URL because we are taking in the this is in the host URL format, and similarly remote because remote object will be connecting here, so remote exception is required if any cases or error occurs. So the first argument here we should take, that is the URL, that is the string name in, that is the name in URL. Okay, so that could be a host dot port. That should be, that is the name host port or name, and is the URL of the object which is registered, which is to be registered. Here host actually refers to the machine. We say that remote machine, or we can call it as a local machine. Both will be, we can call it as a remote machine or local. So where the registry is located, so which the port is the port number, port is the actually the port number on which the registry accept the all the calls, and the name which is a simple string for distinguishing the object from the other object in the respective registry. So that could be, this is the case of why, because we are taking the argument in the first argument, because remote object is not considering because too much important here. So we are taking into the first argument. Why? Because this is the takes in the form of host with the help of port number is the must. We know that why and how we are going to take the post, that is the port unique port ID, that is the unique ID that is required with the port and name and is the URL of the object which are already registered. So here actually the uh, both host and port, this may be omitted, in which uh, case they default to the local host, and which could be a local host, and the port number of that 1099. So why with respectively? So why? Because this could be the form of in the how that we are actually going to the process of, we say that creating server, that could be in the form of the process of creating and binding and the name. So that all should be taken. So actually, why this default to the local host? Because that could be the local host of the particular port number that we had, that is the port number of 1099 that we have taken. That's why both host and port could be, we should have omitted in this case. Why? Because of the local host. Whenever we take the local host, we need not bother about the actual host and port of the unique ID. So that is the case. So whatever that one, but creating the server in the case, first thing we should be create how that an object registry, that is our major task, how the object registry will be done in that. So basically we should have the naming technology. We had discussed about Java RMI and registry, Java RMI and registry, that actually method binding that respective issued whatever the used register to an object, and has this the respective signature that we are taken. So that is the major code of this creating, whenever the creating server. So that we have taken in the form of string name, we say that URL. So that is the uniform resource locator. So that is the uniform resource locator. And another the parameter we have taken, the first argument or parameter we have taken, and other is a remote object, and one of the three, what is that, exception is very important case whenever creating and binding to the network of that one. Already bound exception by default throws, and malformed URL exception whenever error occurs in that respective. Similarly, remote exception, that is very important, and host colon port slash name. So then this could be the URL of the object when it is and how it is to be registered in the part. So this is the case what we have taken for respective default local host and port number respectively. This we have taken, and the process of creating and binding the name, which is given in the next slide. So the process of creating and binding. So this could be taken as given below here. We should go with a try block will be there. So why this we have taken try block? Because that could be taken in the form of the complete try block here. Interface name object. So that is name, class name, the respective parameter that could be taken. Naming dot rebind. So that technique rebind here. So we had discussed just now, that is double slash localhost colon 1099. Similarly, some name that could be taken, and comma object. So here try and catch bar, catch exception E. So the exception could be, because we had taken three exceptions. Any case of any exception, whichever whatever their uh, exception, that should be coming to this here. So now this is the complete code of our activating and storing the book object, which we are going to create book object, that is the class book object or server. Okay, creating server. So we should declare that what and all required header file when we are uh, creating that server code, that one. So now first import java.rmi, this is the mandatory. Next, import java.rmi server. Next, import Java RMI registry is required, because we are going to register that one in the server bind purpose. All the user, all the server, how the parameter and method will be taken into that. And next, import Java RMI registry, local registry into the local host, what we have taken host of that one, name of that one, and respective 1099, that is the unique identification number. So that also we have taken part of that one. Similarly, next we are going to exception. So Java RMI remote exception, because we have to taken remote object, because of that reason we have to taken this header file. Similarly, Java import Java RMI server unicast remote object. Whenever we are going to take a remote object, that should be in the form of always a unicast object. Public. Next, class here, the main class is book server. So that is the class name book server we are going to take. Public static void main, again the method we have taken string. So here string, that is name. Whenever we are taking that name, that is the object we are taken as name, equal to localhost 1099 followed by string of 0. So now we need to take a try and catch box here. So book, try in the book, that one book interface. So that is the object book equal to new book. So that could be taken as the title. So that we have taken double quote, in the double quote title T1 comma. Similarly, next author, author 1 A1. So that could be taken in that one double quote A1. Similarly, next ID, identification, book identity ID number is required for that one, everything. So the that could be taken in the double quote. So naming dot rebind to parameter. So here we have taken name comma book. So that is the why, because the naming should be, we have taken to the in the network bind purpose. So whenever that is required, or we have taken name name and book. So catch exception, whenever exception is there, that should be taken. So print out. So exception, any exception. Now close whatever we open that one, and close this try, and close the main program, and close the class book server. So here what we are saying, that in the above code we assume that when the server code is executed, it is provided with the name that should be associated with the respective book object. So this is the we say that complete the actually the process of creating and binding the name which is given, that we have taken book class book server. So in the next video again we were going to discuss the client, setting up the system, and if possible, implementing an object-oriented system on the website.